According to the Center for American Progress, at least 1 in 4 American children and adolescents will experience some sort of adversity throughout the course of their lifetime, which undoubtedly increases with age, which more than doubles between infants younger than 1, which stands at 5%, and children older than 2 by 11%. Jack Sernett is a professional keynote speaker helping students and young adults experience post-traumatic growth and conquer their inner critic. He is someone who's been able to overcome and persevere many challenges and obstacles in his life in order to experience prosperity and the true meaning of what it means to reinvent yourself after trauma. He truly believes that these obstacles have been placed in his life so that he can learn how to grow instead of go once adversity hits. And now it's his life work and mission to help as many people as possible experience post-traumatic growth and the importance of self-love. And Sernett joined me this week to detail in greater volume the obstacles that he's overcome and how he views adversity and the power of vulnerability and persevering through all of it as a strength. It's an empowering and thought-provoking conversation that you shouldn't miss. So, without further delay, I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Fantastic. Well, Jack, if you're ready, I'll take a moment to welcome you to the program. And I'm super excited to learn how to get you back live, buddy. Always great to see you. And thank you for a few minutes this morning, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Kevin.
Yeah, Jack, I know that you are a keynote speaker that works to help kids and individuals work through their post-traumatic growth and conquer their inner critics. So tell me about all the great work that you do, buddy.
Yeah, so I do speaking as part-time for now. The goal is obviously to get into full-time with the speaking gigs. My full-time work right now is personal training and some mental health coaching, and then I'll do about 1 or 2 speaking gigs a month. And my target audience is mainly high schools and colleges. And the whole approach is the overall overarching broad hood is destigmatizing mental health and just the mental health conversation. But more specifically is helping teach people how to respond to adversity, because you know as well as me, every single person is going to have something happen to them that they don't want to happen. That's just a part of life. And so learning how to respond accordingly so you're not always dictated by what happens to you. You know, I think a lot of people, myself included when I was younger, when something good happens, we're happy. When something quote unquote bad happens, we're sad. We're like a feather in the wind, right? We just get moved around and blown around based on what happens to us without realizing we have so much power in our response. It's that whole like 10-90 rule. Life is 10% what happens to you and about 90% how you respond to what happens to you. And so teaching these kids and these young minds that that's a reality and that's a possibility, as opposed to, you know, sort of our negative default bias that I think a lot of us have in our, like, you know, primal brains, where we immediately go to like that victim mentality, right? And the woe is me. And so helping people understand that, learning how to overcome adversity. And then at the same token, obviously, I'm sure you know this, but it's way easier to deal with adversity and setbacks when you aren't a bully to yourself, when you actually like yourself and respect yourself, or dare I say love yourself. And so teaching people how to improve that conversation in their head, that inner critic, that voice in our head that whispers us sweet nothings. Overcoming that is going to make overcoming adversity a lot easier, because when you're not holding yourself back, it's way easier to respond to the craziness of life that comes up. So that was a lot of word vomit I just threw on you, but that's the overarching goal. Is I share my story, which is quite a unique background for sure, and then just do whatever I can to help teach these students how to respond to adversity and treat themselves like someone they love.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack, you know this, but I'm a huge believer in that there's strength and vulnerability, and being vulnerable is actually a strength when you go through adversity and ultimately overcome it. So tell me, how do you view vulnerability as a strength, and why do you think it's important to be vulnerable?
Yeah, that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I don't know if we would have talked about that, because that's usually not something I bring up right away, but that is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing. Is, to me, it's a sign of strength to admit when you need help and being vulnerable. I say this all the time, especially when I go talk to a bunch of athletes who are like alpha males. I tell them, asking for help is not giving up. Asking for help is refusing to give up. And the only way we can ask for help and work on our weaknesses is if we're honest and vulnerable. And it starts with ourselves. I've noticed this a lot with my clients, and a lot of these students who will come up to me after the speaking gigs. They'll start to realize like they're lying to themselves on a consistent basis, or choosing not to tell the truth, just even to their own self in the mirror. And so being radically transparent and vulnerable is like the first step to start healing some of the things that are holding you back, healing those triggers, those traumas. For me, when I stopped being a BS artist, when I was actually being honest, and I didn't allow the secrets to keep me sick, that's what changed everything. I had that ego, that, oh, I'm fine, type of mentality for so long, and that just kept me digging a deeper and deeper hole. It's the most powerful thing that you can do. I think it's very weak to pretend like you have nothing wrong, you don't need help with anything. I think it's a sign of strength, to your point, to be vulnerable and truly like ask when you need help. And I always come back to that line: asking for help is not giving up. Asking for help is refusing to give up. And it's a skill, right? For me, I've spent 20 years lying constantly, like little white lies here and there. And so for the past like 7 to 8 years, I've had to consistently practice getting out of the habit. It starts with me, my interaction in the mirror when I brush my teeth in the morning. And it starts with talking to people like you, just being honest. Secrets make you sick, being vulnerable, and being okay with asking for help.
Yeah, absolutely. And just building on that, Jack, I know that you have overcome a lot of obstacles in your own life, and you say that overcoming obstacles have allowed you to grow, and you believe that obstacles have been put in your life so you can learn how to grow instead of go by. So I'm wondering how your own personal journey has sort of affected the work that you do today.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. Yeah, it was a little play on words there. I for the longest time would just go through adversity. It takes zero skill to have something quote unquote bad happen to you, or experience adversity, but to actually grow from it and grow through it, GROW, grow through adversity, that takes a special level of skill and practice, and a special type of mentality and approach. And so, what was interesting, Kevin, is ever since I was young, I'd respond the same way to adversity. I would let it make me stressed and depressed. I took on that victim mentality. I'd blame the world and life and other people for all my issues. And I let it develop, I let it allow me to develop some mental health issues. It turned into an eating disorder. I had to drop out of high school because I weighed 120 pounds. Like, it was just this trickle effect. And what was interesting, it's like, the definition of insanity, right? You do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Yep. Well, for so long, for the first 20 plus years of my life, I was responding the same way to adversity without even realizing what I was doing. It was just the same woe is me stress. I always let what happened to me dictate, my emotions and how I viewed life. And then finally, I was in the hospital, and we might get to this eventually, but I was in the ICU with septic shock. And sepsis is when your blood is infected, and it can be very deadly. And I was at the point where I was in septic shock, and I was in the ICU in San Diego. And I think it was an accumulation effect of just hearing this stuff and learning this stuff over the years, but it finally just hit me all at once. It might have been a combination of some of the drugs they were giving me and just me being in a decent headspace. I realized that there's got to be a better way to respond to adversity. Not everyone who has an injury or a crazy like chronic health issue or a death in the family responds by being stressed and depressed. And so one of the quotes I came to was, sickness and pain is a problem for your body and not your mind. It's only a problem for your mind if you decide it is. And I started realizing every doctor I went to for all my chronic kidney issues and bladder issues, they never said, your kidneys suck and now you have to be stressed and depressed. They never said that. I just responded by becoming stressed, anxious, sad, I'm the victim type of thing. And so once I realized that, it's just about taking action. And all of a sudden, I started getting better and becoming a better version of myself through this adversity. So every time something crazy happens or adversity strikes, I'm able to grow through it now and level up as opposed to let it knock me down 3 rungs in the ladder. So it was a 23, 24-year process of actually discovering that, and it finally kicked in. Better late than never,
Well, Jack, I always say everything in life happens for a reason, right, my friend?
Absolutely. I've got a tattoo on my arm. It says amor fati, and it's a Stoicism Latin phrase that means, embracing a love of fate, embracing what happens to you. And one thing I'm sure you can relate to is whenever something would happen, I would be so hung up on stuff that was outside of my control by dwelling on the past and like, oh, what if this didn't happen? I can't believe it. I was wasting so much time and energy on what had already taken place. And so what helped me learn how to grow through adversity was prioritizing my focus on only the things I can control. And I'm sure, as you know, and many of the listeners know, it might be hard to admit, but most of life is out of our control. We can control our attitude and our actions. What happens to us, often we can't. But like we talked about at the beginning, we control how we respond. And it takes reps, right? Repetition is the mother of all skill. The more you practice these things, the easier it gets.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack, a couple of months that I've known you, buddy, you know this story, but I believe that inclusion is the gateway to independence, and building social capital is important, my friend. And I'm curious to get your thoughts on defining your definition of inclusion and acceptance of all people. What does that look like to you, my friend?
Yeah, so I'm a big fan of like philosophers and novelists, and there's this gentleman named Carlos Fuentes. He's a Mexican novelist, and his quote I agree with completely. It says, recognize yourself in he and she who are not like you and me. And to me, that's like one of the most simple but profound ways to explain it is, in my opinion, I agree with that. Inclusion acceptance is recognizing yourself and those around you. We have a lot more in common than we think. One thing I realize about being vulnerable, Kevin, is I can throw a rock to someone who can relate to me in some way. It's amazing how much we have in common, just complete strangers, no matter what background you come from, no matter what physical strengths or ailments you have. And so I'm a huge fan of like just finding yourself and the people around you. And then, the golden rule, it's so cheesy and so cliche, but most things that are cliche are facts. Treat others how you want to be treated. And so that's just how I was raised. But what that gentleman said, Carlos Fuentes, recognize yourself in he and she who are not like you and me. And I think that's like the best way to say it. And just like everything else we talked about, that takes practice. You know what I mean? I think it's easy to sometimes get stuck in the rut of not being including and accepting of everyone. And so that to me is huge. And I think he said it great. That's well spoken.
Well, but I'm also wondering your thoughts on sort of the impact moment that changed your life. What do you think is your light bulb moment that really had impact on your life where you develop sort of your life motto that you live by today?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and there is one that's like my wake up call, my aha moment, and I alluded to it a little bit recently, but from so in 2018, I was in the hospital for over 300 days, for 303 days. In 2019, I was in the hospital for 290 days. In 2020, over 100 days. 2021, 50-ish. Last year, only about 20. But back in 2019, I moved back from San Diego to Kansas City, where I live now. There was a doctor, a urologist out here at KU Medical Center. He was one of two urologists in the country who could do this surgery I needed. So I moved back here, and my family's from here, so it was just it was a perfect little transition. And I was in the ICU. I woke up from this surgery. It was a 12-hour surgery, and I was in the ICU, and I woke up, and there's this gentleman there, and he was the hospital chaplain. And I'm not the most religious guy in the world, but we had a conversation here, and he said we didn't really talk too much about religion and stuff. I remember I was a little foggy from some of the drugs, and he just looked at me in sort of a stern voice, but just to try to shock me, I think. He looked me in the face and he said, "You can let all this make you a victim or a victor." And he stood up and walked out of the room. And I thought that was one of the instances where I finally realized, like, oh, I can choose to respond better to this adversity. I don't need to be that guy who always lets everything happen to him dictate how he feels. And I was like twice this guy's size. So but he acted and talked as if he was a big presence. And I'd meet with him on a weekly basis thereafter. And that moment when I was in the ICU, hooked up to 1,000 machines, he told me, "You can let any and all of this make you a victim or a victor." Stood up and walked away. And it was like his mic drop moment. And it took me a long time to really latch onto that. I wasn't like changed right then and there, but that was the first little seed that was planted where I was like, oh shit, this can really change things for me. And that was back when that was about 3 or 4 years ago. It was 4 years ago now. In the past 4 years, it's been just a process of trying to get better at that every single day.
Well, life is an evolution of a process, isn't it, Jack? Everything in life has a reason for a season, doesn't it?
100%. The mentality I like to use, and I choose to live by, and I say this to all my clients and audiences is, better never stops. That's the goal. Every day, try to find a way to become a better version of yourself, either physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, relationally. There's a whole host of categories, but that's that mentality that the better never stops. Every day, just keep getting better.
Yeah, and just building on that point, but I know that you have shared sort of your unique perspective on resilience, but I'll ask you the formal question. When you think about resilience, what comes to mind for you, my friend?
The ability, so for when I think of resilience, first of all, I think it's an extremely admirable trait. And if I can be known, like selfishly, if I can be known as, like, when people think of me, they're like, oh, that guy's resilient, that would be amazing. Like, that's not the reason why I do certain things, but that would be a very admirable thing to be known as, in my opinion. In my opinion, resilience is not letting things that happen to you dictate your emotions. And obviously, I'm not trying to belittle people's pain, right? There's some crazy stuff that happens. Technically, adversity could be spilling coffee in your lap or having a loved one pass away. Those are both adversity. One is obviously a little bit more extreme than the other. But in my opinion, someone who's resilient is in control of their mind, body, and emotions so that they're not always dictated by what happens to them. And I think that's a super powerful skill, and it's contagious. It rubs off on people. That way, I used to go through my life, Kevin, very nervous and anxious because if something said something mean to me or if something bad happened, I immediately would become stressed and depressed. When you start to become more resilient, and a lot of people out there can probably relate to this, you become a little bit more confident and your anxiety goes down and you're more at peace because deep down in your heart, you can handle whatever happens to you. You can handle it. You'll get through it. You'll embrace it, the amor fati method.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jack, I'm also curious to ask you about how you define emotional courage and what does it mean to you to have emotional courage?
I've never been asked that. That's a really good question. It comes back to what we talked about. The first place my brain goes is when we're talking about vulnerability. One of the things you probably can relate to this as a speaker. One of the things that helped heal me the most was talking about stuff and getting it off my chest and out of my brain. And so, in my opinion, I think one thing that's helped me more than anything is developing the courage to talk about the things that will hold me back or my triggers, and then it opens up that conversation for everyone else. And so, I'm not really sure if it's exactly what you're looking for with that question, but to me, like emotional courage is another super admirable trait, and that can go hand in hand, in my opinion, with vulnerability. Vulnerability equals emotional courage.
Yeah, absolutely. And my friend is a motivational speaker. I'm sure that we can both share the same synergy with this question. I know for all motivational speakers, their motivations are different. So tell me, what do you think is your best moment as a motivational speaker? Whether it be if someone comes up to you after a speech and said, you really impacted my life. How do you define your best moments as a motivational speaker?
Yeah, that's exactly along the lines of what you just said. After the speeches are done, in particular, after a speech I did recently, it was supposed to be a free speaking gig. I ended up getting paid afterwards because they liked it a lot, and they felt it was impactful and worth it. But it wasn't about the money. It was afterwards when I had a line of students, and particularly some of these student athletes, come up to me, and those conversations and those moments of them being vulnerable with me, and when the light bulb goes off in their head that they too can overcome all this stuff that they might have in common with me, that right there is gold. That's worth $1 trillion right there to me. Is those conversations after the speech. The talk is amazing. That's super fun. But then once it's done and you get to talk one-on-one with these students afterwards, that is, and particularly my last speech I did at a high school here locally, that was my most prideful moment as a speaker, for sure. Was that, and I think you can relate, obviously, having conversations with people after the speeches are over, but that was amazing. It was really, really cool. And to hear these guys open up, so to speak, and have the emotional courage to, spill the beans and be honest with what's holding them back. That was awesome. That was awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Life is always about impacting people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's negatively or positively. Whether you know it or not, you're either negatively impacting someone or you're positively impacting someone. We're all impacting each other in one way or the other. Ideally, it's more positive than negative, but however, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Life is all about experiences. We can always learn from our failures and our successes, right, Jack?
Yeah, as I've gotten older, I've realized that more and more. And I think our moments in time and our experiences are what we'll remember when we're older and on our deathbed. When I was in the ICU with septic shock, sort of flirting with the Reaper, I never once thought about that really cool, like, watch I have or the next pair of shoes I got for Christmas when I was 14 or whatever. I was only thinking back and reflecting on certain specific experiences and moments in time that were amazing, parts of my life. I was never going back to the material stuff and all this other stuff that we might focus on, or I was thinking about the people who positively impacted me the most. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, absolutely. And buddy, I was chatting with our mutual friend Joe Johnston the other day, and I always end our conversations by telling him that the grind is my love language, right? So tell me about having success in life and embracing the grind, buddy, and how important that is to you, bud.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in I really believe people have to enjoy the process more than the prize. If you're only doing something for the end result, you're going to be miserable until you get there, and you might not ever actually get there. What you refer to as the grind, the day-to-day process, I love that. I love getting my proverbial hands dirty and just getting to work. I think it's interesting. You ask 10 people on the street, what is your of success, you'll probably get 10 different answers. I'm around a lot of people who are big on like materialistic things, like how much money you have in your bank account, material like your car or your house, apartment. I couldn't disagree more with that. I recently, Kevin, I asked 30 of my clients or 30 people over a month, and most of them were my clients. Do you love what you do for a living? I got 2 yeses out of 30 people. 2 people said they love what they do for a living. And it doesn't make you a bad person if you don't like what you do. But in my opinion, success is loving what you do on a daily basis. And that doesn't mean every second of every day, right? But in general, what you are doing to fulfill your life and your career with your family, etc. If you don't love it and you're not enjoying it, that's the opposite of success. And so I'm not a guy who looks at like material outcomes or it. For me, it's, do I enjoy what I'm doing, the daily grind as you refer to, as much or more than the prize at the end? And that was just an eye-opening experience for me, and that helped me sort of realize I want to make sure and prioritize loving the process and enjoying the grind. And then the prize or the end result is just the cherry on top.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jack, I want to talk to you about transformation in life, business, and in fitness as well, buddy. Because as you know, buddy, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia cerebral palsy. Simply means that I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. But one of the things that I always live my life by is always active, because once you're active and moving, then you're included in the conversation of progress, in my view. So tell me, when you look at the word transformation, what do you think of when we talk about life, business, and fitness, my friend?
Yeah, you're speaking my language now when you're talking about movement. I really believe we are movement beings. We are meant to move and use our bodies. We're not meant to sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day and do nothing and be sedentary. So for me, transformation in fitness is slowly but surely turning your weaknesses into strengths. I think transformation in life in general, I'm a gigantic fan of choosing to do something that sucks every single day. Actively, strategically placing adversity into your everyday life so you can practice overcoming that and becoming a better version of yourself. Back to our earlier, topic of conversation. We're never staying the same, right? We're either getting better or we're getting worse. And so for me, transformation in fitness, career, life is that better never stops mentality. And one of the ways to do that is consistency. Joe, our mutual friend Joe talks about that. Consistency compounds. And so for me, I have a couple of rules, little daily protocols, non-negotiable I like to follow. And I try to rub this off on some of my clients and audiences is stepping out of your comfort zone at least one time a day, doing something strategically, placing adversity in your daily life. Obviously, movement. I train really hard personally, 5 or 6 days a week, and I'll do 1 or 2 days of active recovery. And you speaking from your own experience, movement has helped you a lot, which is awesome. And then in the career world, for me, like transformation is you and I being vulnerable by asking someone like Joe, how can we get better as a speaker? How can we improve in whatever our career path is? So it's a whole host of things. That was a long-winded answer, but for me, it's that mentality of the better never stops, because that's the only way you can transform. It's hard to be transform and develop transformation if you act like you know it all and you have it all figured out, right? If you're not vulnerable and you're not asking for help or you're not working on your weaknesses, you're not going to transform.
Yeah, absolutely. As you're talking, Jack, I'm making a list of have-to-dos when we meet up in Kansas City, and I just add working out together on the list, buddy. We gotta hit the gym when I come visit you in Kansas City. It's a date, okay?
100%. It'll be a bro date for sure. You'll either you can come to the gym I work at, or my apartment gym is really cool too. Absolutely. I'd love to throw down. I call it the weight buffet. I'd love to do attack the weight buffet with you.
Well, as my brother always tells me, you only have one body, so we got to take care of it, right?
Yeah. On that note, one of the last things that makes me think of is Kevin, I can't remember who said, I think it was Warren Buffett said this to a business class one time. He said, so Kevin, if I told you the car you have now is the only car you're going to have for the rest of your life, how would you take care of that car? You would make sure it never rusts. You'd make sure the oil stays changed. You would wash it consistently. You would have maintenance on it, right? Because you want it to last. That is exactly the same thing we have with our body. That's your one body. This is our one body we have for our entire life. And so keeping it up in good shape, keeping the maintenance, fueling it well, that to me is something that's helped me a lot. Prioritize continuing to improve my own health and my own body, as well as a lot of my clients. It's an interesting little example. I think that helps a lot of people who are newer into the health world. Just makes sense. If this was the one car you had for the next 50 years, of course you would take care of it. That same thing is the case for your body. This is your one body. It's your temple.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Jack, my final question for you, buddy, is a two-parter. So, if that made your life into a movie, my friend, what do you think the plot line of that movie would be? And how would you want your personal and professional legacy to be defined?
Part of me goes to when you ask me that, like the personal and professional legacy, how do I want that to be defined? I'm very big on accepting and being honest that death is a reality. I have a tattoo on my arm that says memento mori, which means remember that you will die one day. Let that fact determine what you do and say and think. And so part of me thinks I don't really care at all because I'll be dead. I'm not going to know the difference what people define my legacy as. But then a part of me wants to actually answer the question too is, I would like to be selfishly defined as the most resilient mother effer everyone knew. And a word I like to come back to, and I'll try not to, if you don't want me to cuss, I don't have to, but I like the word unfuckwithable. That is, in a weird way, the mentality I try to live my everyday life. And so personally and professionally, he was a resilient mother effer. That's the definition I would selfishly want to go by. But then again, it's like other people's opinions and how people define me. It's out of my control, right? I'm going to live my life, do my thing. Whether you define me as this, that, or the other thing, I'm not going to let it dictate how I feel.
Yeah, absolutely. And just one more for you, buddy. I'm curious if we can end our conversation by what does it mean to you to be truly authentic? What would be your closing message about the importance of authenticity?
Yeah, I that comes back to me when I used to lie all the time. It was so draining and I was so exhausted all the time faking it, right? Pretending I was someone that I wasn't. I used to lie so that people would like me. I used to put on a front and act like everything's fine. And when I would get done with my day and get home, I felt like I got hit by a truck. It was so exhausting. And what's interesting is a lot of people can notice that and weed out the bullshit really quickly. And, to me, like being your true authentic self is our highest form of expression. And it's the only way we can truly like love and respect ourselves. Because at the end of the day, Kevin, when you're lying, you can't fool yourself. I know when I'm lying, I can't fool myself, but I might be able to lie to you and you might not realize it. And so for me, the only way that I was able to get a better relationship with myself and start to respect myself more and like myself more was just being authentic, real, and radically transparent. And that is something I'm still working on. It's a daily process because an old version of myself, a small percentage of me, is still that young Jack that was a BS artist just lying to people, right? So for me, authenticity was one of the first ways I was able to be vulnerable, improve my life. But then I think it's the most important thing anyone can do because it's the only way I think you can truly be happy with yourself if you know deep down you're living your authenticity.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very difficult. It is difficult though, right? It can be tough.
Yeah, well, you only have one chance to make a first impression, so you might as well make it an authentic one, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely, my friend. And quickly tell me, Jack, if people want to get connected with the great work that you do, buddy, what's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, so my website is jacksernettinspires.com, JACKSERNETT, inspires.com. Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, jack.sernett.inspires. You guys can find me there. And I'm sure you might be able to type it in the show notes or whatever if they forget how to spell it. That's the easiest way. Reach out. I'm not going to ever tell you to F off. I'll respond. And I appreciate anyone listening to this. And I appreciate you, Kevin, for having me on.
Well, Jack, I have to tell you, it's a real pleasure to have gotten the chance to get to know you, buddy. You have an inspiring story of both perseverance, resilience, and inspiration. And I want to thank you for the good work that you do to inspire the next generation of leaders. And I want to thank you for your friendship and for being here this morning. It's most appreciated.
Thank you, Kevin. Likewise to you. Everything ditto right back at you. Yeah, I love seeing all your content and stuff. And once again, I'm super grateful. Thanks for having me on.